that's actually really interesting, Alex, and that might be more useful than yours. Because it's like, hey, there are these edge cases, so let's create some policy around these edge cases so we don't increase time.
What I love about speaking about Brad and Gore and others, they also have a study. Yeah, they also have a study.
Gord hates this, by the way. We actually have
so
we had him on the podcast.
Case study?
Yeah, which one has a one case?
No, I want
Did you want to hear us discuss this with them? We did a podcast episode with Brad and Gord where we were talking about this exact thing because I've been telling this story about Brad now for like 8 years. All right?
Keep going.
Should I?
So they have a management science paper too about Uber entry, and it's about entrepreneurial activity. And what I like about that paper, which is beyond the case studies,
The tiger blood?
or embedded cases within the case, whatever. So it's the fact that, of course, they hypothesize that actually two possible explanations could exist here. That Uber entry leads to more entrepreneurial activity because you can fund part of your your venture, by driving Uber when you're building a cash flow, whatever. Or it actually might reduce entrepreneurial activity because instead of going for your venture, you're driving Uber and you become comfortable. So what I love about that paper is the fact that it actually tries to address, both of those.
And that's the trend. So in our podcast, that's what they talked about. They're like, finding A affects B and dealing with endogeneity issues is only the first step anymore. The big trend right now, and this is what the interesting thing that I didn't know that they did. So usually, and then they have to identify the mechanisms, right? That's the big trend. And a big approach that they use to identify mechanisms is experiments, oftentimes, if they can't get other data sets and stuff. But according to Gord, he's doing qualitative research. So he's got some papers where to identify those mechanisms, they're actually doing qualitative research. So, and this is, Gord, I would argue, is probably, top 5 of our econometrician kind of dudes.
I think part of it is also driven by the reviewers.
Identifying mechanisms.
Like his research, right? I just give this example, the entrepreneurship thing. I think it's only useful, like if you say both could exist, then you find one versus the other. It's not that useful in the sense that you have to find this boundary condition when it's this and when it's that. Otherwise, it's not that useful to propose 2 hypotheses and say, oh, this is true, right? What the challenge is, it's very hard to find those conditions where one is better than, one is more likely. So they have to resort to, I do that all the time too, surveys, interviews, and all that. I think the IS reviewers nowadays become so enamored by the mechanisms. I don't see that in other disciplines. Because it's almost impossible. Unless you do,
it's impossible to do it perfectly, but you can do it better than what we know already, right?
That's why I think the qualitative aspect comes to play. Is that you could do some of that to try to explain, but even though I think that wasn't really intended in the first place, the qualitative studies typically are not used to confirm mechanisms.
No.
Yeah, so that there is this mismatch. A lot of people do that because the reviewers hammer them on the mechanisms. Because IS reviewers, I just find them so strict and so tough on the mechanisms. Every phenomena has to have a mechanism. It's important, but I'm just saying that they're very, very focused on that.
IS reviewers are the worst.
If you look at marketing, we read a paper, mass shooting affects sales. 2 months accepted. And we're like 3 years after 4 revisions, and still major revisions. But anyway, I'm not going to rant against reviewers.
So this got me thinking about what Kevin and I talk about over research. So we talk about, in metaphysics, any research is the author's opinion. I didn't mean subjectively. I just mean it's like Nietzsche said, it's your will to power. It's like
we're bringing up Nietzsche. All right.
Okay.
Let's talk about real philosophy. Different philosophers. I'll give you one. Charles Sanders first. Charles Sanders first, who's legitimate, again an said is, in his version, his definition of truth is what is useful by way of belief. And you're a scholar, and you want to believe that, Obamacare drives up, ads against Obamacare drive up signups for Obamacare because of this mechanism. That's your belief. You believe that's true. Now, you might believe that's true just because it's your preconception. You might believe that's true because you read the research, so you think that'll happen. Or you don't have that preconception, you didn't read the research, you just went and looked at some data, and that's what your guess is to what explains the data you looked at. Regardless of your path to a belief, that's the best belief you have at any time. Now, this is what Charles Sanders Peirce argued with scientists, and he was a friend of Lincoln's, is that that's great, as long as we all know that our belief is probably wrong. All right? That it's, at a minimum, not the whole picture, but it could just be outright wrong. It could just be whatever. So we as scientists need to, of course, hold a belief. You can't not have a belief. But what we have to do is what we call fallibilism. We should be very humble in our beliefs. That thing that I found is what I believe at this point, based on the best evidence that I have at this point. Now I'm going to, whatever, subject it to strict tests, try and elaborate on it, do all these things. And that's what being a scholar is. So fallible. Nothing we do is perfect. And as a side note, this is one of my problems with a lot of researchers. They do a study. It has to be perfect, doesn't it? You have to get rid of all the robustness checks that everybody in the review panel wanted. You have to do all that, so that inference, that little causal inference or whatever, is totally perfect. And then they want to go publish it in the New York Times or something and say, all firms should do such. Everyone, when you advertise, they will, even if you say bad things, they'll go sign up for Obamacare. So let's set policy to say bad things about Obamacare. Right? They do one silly little study, and then they immediately want the New York Times to pick it up, and they want everybody to. If we take the fallibilist position, we should tell the New York Times, no, do not publish a damn thing about this until 20 other people have done similar research and until we build a strong edifice of knowledge. And then once we have a strong edifice of
back
knowledge.
to the culture though, right? Because if we look at medicine, right, the drug tests, like 6 people took this drug and they all got cured of cancer, and suddenly we all just
like
went
Ebola.
through another 5
We need a
years,
cure
right?
for Ebola.
But it's very difficult because if you say the moon's made of cheese, right, or there's canals on Mars, like
That might be your belief, but if
people
you're
believe
fallible,
that, right? And so there's hard scientists, there's
there's Ebola.
Alright, a follow-up question.
Right.
So in your expert opinion, do you think theory needs to be fallible?
social science.
Yes, with a huge exclamation mark, 100%. That's the big problem I have with when people think about theory. Theory doesn't have to. Theory is a scaffolded framework to help us think about the world. But we should be very humble in our use of theories. Absolutely.
But what makes Idioms, for example, interesting and worth researching is the fact that, there is a theory in use out there, at least an intuition that most people that those ads would be negative for Obamacare. But what makes it interesting to study it is the fact that you can do a study that proves the opposite.
Yep.
So how does that fit here? Because in a sense, I feel that in order to make an interesting study, the framing is really about showing that something that that from intuition seems, correct, or in the literature.
Yeah, well, that's just it. Let's say
You can counterprove a belief.
there's no research ever on citizen behavior, and then you do your study, and it's like, okay, that's all we have. So theory is based on that.
We are unnecessarily complicating things. This is how I would very simply put things together. First of all, rather than beliefs, I would say explanations.
Okay.
And by the way of science, we just have explanations, and we can never prove anything. We can just reject things. So as long
can't even reject. Yeah, go ahead.
as long as you you can reject things. As long as you let's say for a moment. As long as your explanation is not refuted, it could be an explanation, and that is an explanation that we
Fast
have
forward to
so
last
far.
year,
And
my
if I
doctor
give an
had me do a
explanation
skin.
and you give a completely different explanation, and none of them are refuted, they could both explain the same thing. And here's the thing, if you ask me what is this, I can tell you that it is a key, because I can open my door, right? Or I could say it's a wallet, because I have my credit card information, right?
So what you're
So
saying,
both
again,
of them
so
at
we're
the
saying
same
the same
time.
thing. The only thing that we would probably have to play with is the idea of refutation.
So why do you think that we cannot refute things? Isn't the whole point of a theory or a hypothesis is that it should be refutable? So if you come up with a hypothesis that is not, I mean, and I'm not saying that it is not possible, right? You can come, right? You can come up with a hypothesis that is not refutable, but there is no longer it is a religious thing. It's not a scientific thing.
So that's
right?
Popper, and that's Karl Popper and his idea of falsification. And he was arguing with verificationism, which is these people who had theories, and then they would just keep verifying it. And if they didn't contradict it, it verified it, and they would support it. Because no, they're not framed. And he was, so where Karl Popper got this is he was comparing Freud to Einstein. And if you look at Freud and Einstein, and you compare the two, what do you think? You think that Freud is a real scientist. He's doing experiments, he's got notes, he's doing all of this scientific method. Nothing he says is ever refuted. Everything he says gets supported by the things that he's doing. He's a real scientist, and he's doing real scientific work. You look at Einstein, what's he doing? Well, he never did an experiment. He's doing some equations and writing letters to people, and in no way following scientific method. What Popper's argument was that Einstein is actually the scientist, and Freud is a charlatan. And he put Marx in the same category as Freud. He said Freud, Marx, these are people who create this theory of the world, and then they just fit everything into the theory of the world. Nothing refutes the theory. So that's the problem, is that if you create an expansive enough theory, this is what Popper said, everything will verify, and you can always accommodate whatever you see with your theory. He said that the beauty of Einstein was that the way he framed it was indeed falsifiable. That here's a test, it'll either be A or B, and if it's A, it means this, if it's B, it means that. He said that's a real scientist. So although he's not doing experiments, he's not doing all this stuff, that's a real scientist because it's falsifiable. And then here is, so that was great. And that's where he gets that idea of falsification, falsifiability. The problem is when you actually want to refute something, there are measures of the thing you want to refute, there's all that, and the problem is refutations just like theories. Theories are always fallible, or explanations, if you prefer to call them explanations, that's fine. I like theories because a theory is an explanation that embodies a cumulative tradition. So it's what scholars do. Anyone can have an explanation. Our explanations as scholars we call theories.
Call it scientific explanation.
Or, yeah, however you want to do it, right? But that's the whole point. That's what distinguishes us from common sense theories, if you will. But the problem is, if we actually want to refute, like we do an experiment, one could argue, well, we measured it wrong, the conditions were, and then we have to do a follow-on experiment. Refutations are never final, in a sense, just like theoretical explanations are never final. So the only way we can be confident in and this is the criticism against Popper after he works, the only way we can be confident in our reputations is the same way we can be confident in our explanations.
Following on refutation and Einstein, they say, when he came up with theory, somebody said, these 100 other physicists wrote, refutation of your theories, and he said, if they had really refuted it, one would have been enough. The fact that 10 of them can be 100. So
that's the point, but just like theory, if I get a number of cases and I start doing these things, yeah, maybe I'm still wrong, but I'm starting to get confident in my, what I call belief, what you call explanation. I'm still fallible, could still be wrong, but we're starting to think, hey, maybe this is working. Same with reputations. Yeah, one reputation, maybe they measured it wrong. Another one, it's like, no, I'm getting to the point where maybe I don't have confidence in my original thing anymore, because maybe if you're a Marxist, right? At one point, when a society implements communism and it keeps failing and they keep doing these transgressions, at one point you as a communist may say, okay, my theory's refuted.
They just say it's not true communism.
Yeah. It wasn't implemented properly, or it wasn't whatever, right? So, yeah, exactly. Has communism been refuted? I don't know, you tell me.
So practically, I'm thinking practically, right? So I'm coming back to Ola's point, like, you need to have something that should, in order to make it interesting, should have some kind of twist, intentional twist. I think did we discuss something related to this idea? If you think about this reputation idea, right? You either some kind of straw man, and then you try to shoot it down, right? Is this
Yeah, you need a starting point. And so, yeah, and that's sometimes the starting point is conventional wisdom. Right? People generally think that if you have a negative ad, it will set people away from something. But I would argue if you go to marketing theory, let's just say, I don't know anything about marketing theory or people theory, but let's say there's a theory that, it's kind of like the conventional wisdom that all news is good news. That any mention of your program is let's say there's a theory from 1940 that actually said any government program that's mentioned either positively or negatively will attract people to that government program. So maybe you did your study, and maybe there was actually a study in 1940 that actually said it already. And unless you're going to know that area, this is what my argument is. It distinguishes us. The person at Google has more data than I do, and they can do machine learning better than I can. People in whatever can do whatever statistical or econometric method better than I can. Everyone else can do better data sets, better, right? What do we have? The only thing I would argue we have is we know. We don't have to actually do an empirical test with Obamacare because we've read the stuff and we know from 1940 that there's a theory of people will sign up for a government program based, right? Because we know the body of knowledge in that domain. And we can abstract out enough to show that this is an instance of that broader phenomenon that has been shown for a century. That's what we bring to the table. I'm actually a little worried that our field is too enamored, especially information systems, because we're a bunch of technical people. We like to play with machine learning, and we like statistics, and we like the methods. Even qualitative people, they love the grounded theory structures, right? And it's like everybody likes to do the analysis and play with the tools and get the data sets, and we're foregoing our responsibility and our key, competitive advantage. And our competitive advantage is we know the abstracted knowledge of the century, right?
Well, how is that going to sustain in 3 years when this research GPT gets so good? This guy at Google knows as exactly much as we do.
I don't know. This is why I'm an administrator.
But they already know so much that we just have. It's always been like that. I mean, it's like it has always been the case that these people know more than we do.
Well, but I don't know. But my point is, so what's our job? Our job is to use theory GPT to tell it which theory we're interested in. Right? Which perspective are we coming to it from sociological? Are we coming to it from economic? Which question are we asking? I don't know. I don't have an answer.
That comes back to the question. A lot of people say that business research doesn't matter. Right? It lags behind the industry practices. Well, but that's the nature of explanations. It's always past looking.
I don't know. I'll tell you this right now. My work with industry is always stuff we researched 20 years ago. I mean, half the time it's just good project management. It's like strategy. What are your goals? Well, we don't know. All right, so let's define your goals. Let's operationalize your goals. It's like the 101 is what I do with industry. The whole stuff we've been talking about, digital versus digital transformation. Your stuff in whatever the hell that was, 2014, and it's like they're just now starting to, really start internalizing that. It's like I don't know. I don't think research follows industry. I think research precedes the good research precedes it. You're in digital transformation. You wrote a digital transformation. You didn't even call it digital transformation.
Well, IT transformation.
Yeah, but it's a digital transformation. And the good stuff precedes. Your layered modular architecture, that preceded. I mean, yes, in technical terms it was happening, but people weren't thinking of that way in organizing. No, I think the good scholarship precedes. And makes the connections. But let's pick on Olaf for a second. I don't know if that's your most cited paper. It's the one that I certainly read. It's with Young Jin and Kale, and it's this layered modular architecture. And the beauty of that is not that there are apps, and there's an app store, and you have open-ended on the one layer. No, it's that there's this the way we structure organizations and markets, and they will not follow modularity. They'll follow this open-ended modularity. So it becomes a business thing, not a technical thing. what Ola and gang did is took a technical phenomenon and abstracted it out based on what they knew with organizational processes and organizational stuff, and showed that it applied it. They did a move of abstraction that was rooted in deep knowledge about organizational theory. That abstraction move, I think, is what we bring to the table when we look at empirical phenomena. So that abstraction move I call theory. You might call explanation, you might call it belief. It doesn't matter what we're calling it, but it's that thing. So anyway,
if I may, because I've had this research idea for a long time. It's like when, like in the human AI age, when does human matter? Right? I can't find a situation where human actually matter because mostly in my experiments in the human don't matter. You mentioned about abstraction. I think it's interesting. Could you elaborate a little bit about this abstraction idea?
All right, so Brad and I actually we started this, and I wasn't doing it, so they kicked me off of the collaborative. This is very focused, not for sure. So,
did you kick it out of?
Well, no, we just decided, all right, if you're going to be this driven, you got to realize I'm a little less regimented. Like every Monday, he wanted to meet, and he wanted like write it down every week and stuff. And it's like crap. You're collaborating with the wrong guy, so we bailed. But the idea was this, and because we were drinking, and we had this idea of how he and I, from different kind of perspectives, could do a collaboration. And I said, well, and we had this exact conversation about abstraction. And it was something like this. You know, he studied a bunch of social media platforms, and he studied how these social media platforms had impacts on whatever regions. So Uber's one of them, the entrepreneurship one. He had a couple of others where he would look at some digital platform is introduced to a region, and then it impacted that region. Now, every single one of it, so he has like 8 papers that essentially do that. And then if we were to look at your work and some other work, we'd see that actually there's like this other dozen or so guys in IS that are also looking at whatever, Craigslist comes into a region. Other platforms go into a region, and there's some of them. So here's a body of like 24, 25 papers at the time that are all about in comes a platform. See how I've abstracted away from Craigslist and Uber? I just said a platform, a peer-to-peer platform. Peer-to-peer platform comes into a region and affects human behavior. Okay? So we need to do a meta theory. And usually these are econometricians. They're kind of theory light. Like their reviewers force them to put a little theory in the front. So they cite the empirical findings of the other papers, and then some of them put like resource-based view in the front or something because they had to have theory, so they put in like a couple of paragraphs of resource-based view or whatever the hell they do, right? So something like that. But they're not worried about that. They just want to show the impact. And then that's your conclusion. So what we were going to do, and we actually built this little model, and one of the things was risk. So putting them in there, and maybe we had certain types of risk that would increase, other types of risk that would decrease, and then you get this risk-averse behavior versus risk-tolerant behavior. So we had this like mechanism of risk aversion, mechanism of risk tolerance, and we could fit all the papers. It's kind of like, so we called it meta theory. And I still want to do this. So if you want to do it, join with Brad and me, and you can do the work. And I'll help with the model, and then Brad can crack the whip. But we were going to do that, and we actually have a framework. So we made progress on this for like a few weeks. But I think that's something I want to do with econometric studies. And it really bothered me because theory people. So I was at the University of Georgia. A lot of people like Alana Karahana and Amrit Tawana, wonderful researchers. They would complain about econometricians and how they didn't want to do theory. I think Anindigo has told Elena once, theory's all a bunch of bullshit. I want to go do empirical stuff, right? Or something like that. And I could be mixing up that,
start slideshow, take slide 4. I don't give a shit about the first 3.
About the first 3, yeah. So I think, so these people want theory, and I'm like, why would you make a duck walk? If someone wants to do econometrics, let them do econometrics. They're great papers, right? Have them do it. What you should do, if you want to add theory to their papers, is add theory to their papers. Do a meta-theoretic contribution. Grab a bunch of empirical findings, abstract them up, make a theoretical argument. So we were going to do it around risk in a region. Whoever wants to do the work on this, we'll send you our slides and we can do the work. But that's just it. So I think we do need abstractions. But that doesn't mean every paper has to have the abstractions. That's another thing I think we have. We're trying to get every paper to do everything. No. Some papers should do the abstractions and the connecting. Some papers should report on the empirics. I think 80% of our papers should be research notes. I think most of our work is not perfect. It's flawed. It's a data set. So just make it a research note, get it published, boom, 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 and then every once in a while, a big grand paper can be.
Are you gonna make that recommendation?
I've been making it all the time, and my papers, in the last year, 4 papers I assigned MISQ were published, and all but one I submitted as a research note, and then they made me turn one into. So I think 2 ended up published research notes, 2 ended up full papers, and one of the full papers they made us turn it into a full paper from the research note because they gave us extra something. Oh, that must have been good. Usually it's the other way. Yeah. All right. Well, guys, I didn't get too far, but the point is, there are problems. I get a pattern. I go study. I look at some data. The pattern could just be a regression. Find some relationship between 2 variables. The pattern could be some process. The pattern could be anything. Different methods are going to generate different patterns. It's always a case, so I'm always limited in generalizability. The other thing too is no data, and this kind of goes to what Robert was saying earlier, which is everything is always interpreted. There's always some programmer who wrote the scripts. No, whatever we're trying to do, whatever data we're looking at, we haven't gotten the perfect data. It's not the Schumpeterian dream of we're studying money and money is a measure of itself, therefore we're studying the phenomenon itself. No, there's always an interpretation of
I want to say something about what I don't know if that's what you mean, but Giddens had this notion of double hermeneutics, and the point is really that when you interview someone, I have a dialogue with you, you suddenly adopt some of my vocabulary in talking about the phenomenon. So and that's the double hermeneutics, because I interpret what you do, and
what I interpret.
You hear me interpreting what you do, and you want to please me, so you kind of code constructed, and that's a double hermeneutics, and that makes the data, the data and the transcriptions, it becomes fabricated.
You know what's a perfect example of the double?
Not music.
No, but when I think of double hermeneutic, like you just described it, I think of like an interview. So that person is making sense of their life.
Yeah.
You're making sense of them making sense of their life.
Yeah.
Co-constructing. That's the double hermeneutic. Now I can think of it in a digital sense. So when I'm working out in my basement, I have a playlist, so I'll be playing the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and there will be a song that I don't want to hear while I'm working out, but I don't want to train the model to not play the song, because if I say skip the song, it's not going to feed me the song in the future. But I like the song, I just didn't want it now. I will tolerate the song I don't want now because I'm training the measure of it. So it's kind of the digital double hermeneutic. And I bet you do it with sleep. I bet you do it with a bunch of things. So we think we're measuring preferences, right? We think preferences are evident of what our actual preferences are. The whatever I listen to, the Apple Music, thinks it's getting at my preferences. But I am aware I have some mental model of the song, and I'm manipulating its preferences. I mean, my sleep ring, it's similar. Maybe there's a bunch of things. So there's a double hermeneutic actually in digital as well, digital based. Anyway, all data is imperfect. Sample's always a case. So there are serious problems. So how do I establish it? Man, I came up with this cool pattern.
Hello.
Basically, I can never establish it.
Hey, how are you? I'm done with this, and now I have a
So we have to, and that's what, this is the start of my presentation. So I will whip through it. It's here. This is in second round. Put it as a commentary. We're trying to do a bunch of things with each of these, but I'll give you the essence of it.
Okay, let me
what
talk.
we did is we went back.
I'll call you back.
So how do we establish a valid pattern? Well, the way
Yeah,
we
but
do
then
it,
nothing. It's the book that I
Yeah.
So let's call me when you're. I have a 4 o'clock meeting.
I was thinking experiment is
Seminar.
the first thing you should learn, and then everything you do
nothing
is
major.
try to
How
approximate experimental.
everything okay?
When you do econometrics, you try to do
Your chair came
What's that?
into the meeting about something.
I
It's
see.
something like okay, bye.
I borrow it.
What? I copied and pasted it from. Yeah, so experiment, qualitative case studies are experiments, econometric field studies are experiments, everything's trying to approximate the view of experiments. You should always start with an experiment. So we started with that.
So case studies or the next one.
Everything is a case.
And everything's a case study. And all case studies are experiments. Everything's an experiment. Thank you, Kevin. I'm gonna actually, it was new to me, but yeah. So anyway, our buddies Cook and Campbell had 4 validities: internal validity, external validity, statistical conclusion validity, which is the one I always had a problem with, because I felt like statistical conclusion validity is a different level of abstraction from the others. Internal, external makes sense, doesn't it? Construct, which is measurement, right? Then reliability to talk about it has something to measure. But I always thought that statistical conclusion validity bothered me. Why? Well, partially because my dissertation was qualitative and there were no statistics. But the other was like, what are they really trying to get at? They're trying to get at the validity of my, I don't know, relational inference or something. And one way to do that is, of course, with statistics. Find some p-value or whatever. But statistics is one way to establish validity of a conclusion. So that always bothered me. And that's what our paper is about. It's like, let's replace statistical conclusion validity with inference validity. That it's no longer statistical conclusions is what we're going for. And there are a couple of reasons. Statistical conclusion validity is based on an experimental paradigm where you have a null hypothesis. You're always comparing it to the null hypothesis. We don't have a null hypothesis. We're doing exploratory work. So that's checked off. The other problem, why it's not a statistical conclusion in the usual way, is that we have these big sample sizes where everything is significant. And it's like if everything becomes significant, then a lot of our old tests don't work. So boom, and then of course there's what we talk about, which is, well, I'm constructing something, and it's always going to be underdetermined by the empirical data that I'm using for the thing that I'm constructing the explanation. We just spent a lot of time discussing. So if I have these 3 things, I can never establish my conclusion statistically. I can never use from here on out a p-value and say my conclusion is supported. I have to do something else, or something in conjunction with the p-value. And I went back to Socrates and Campbell, and they actually have this quote where they talk about validity. And really they say validity is a judgment, or you could call it a belief, or you could call it an explanation. I don't care. It's a statement, right? It's a judgment about the extent of which, and this is Socrates and Campbell. This isn't some hippie, right? This is like the one we all read. It comes from empirical findings with other sources of knowledge. It's a judgment call. There's no objective validity. There's we gotta make judgment calls. Fallible human judgments. Wow, we're back to the fallibility. They're not absolute. It's only various degrees. So I'm of course attracted to this because if it's something really cool and new that we don't know about, maybe we don't have to be as valid, right? Maybe we can be a little less valid because it's a cure in Ebola, and we can't cure Ebola, so let's use this until we find a cure for Ebola. That's important. Or maybe it's like we've been studying this for 50 years, maybe we're going to hold it to a higher criteria of validity, right? So again, judgment call. We as humans make these judgment calls. So, yeah. So, what they offer are 3 criteria. And this is not me, this is Socrates and Campbell. We're just using it and trying to get an MIT paper using their ideas. But they basically say there are 3, and this is what, as an econometrician, you have 1 recourse for validity, and that's correspondence. To what degree does what I'm saying correspond with the data? So any assertion you make, any claim you make for validity, has to have some sort of data backing. There has to be a robustness check, there has to be some sort, it's all empirical, corresponding with reality. Well, according to them, that's just one way to establish validity. The other is coherence, and this is that knowledge, right? If you go back to their quote, they said that, well, empirical findings and consistency of findings with other knowledge. That's the cumulative tradition, right? So if existing knowledge knows one thing really well, and I'm finding something that's questioning it, that's interesting. And sure, I need some correspondence. I need to show that I did my homework. But if it's like an interesting, different data set, I should be able to make that theoretical assertion. And then the final one is pragmatic. And this is the Ebola issue. It's like, we don't have any knowledge and we need it. We'll take a little scrap of knowledge with really bad data over nothing. And then hopefully we'll get better data than knowledge over time. So those are the three criteria. And then there are what we were calling challenges or pitfalls for establishing validity. And I guess the two main things are fit and specification. So a big problem with establishing validity, the fit one, if you're a machine learning person, you can think of overfitting and underfitting a model, right? If you overfit a model, it'll work for that domain, but no other domain. If you underfit a model, yeah, it'll work for every domain, but it'll be totally inaccurate for any particular thing. So that pitfall happens with any of our inferences. And then specification, if you're like a regression person, this might be equivalent to your, now we have a more, Socrates is one of my co-authors with this. He has a way more sophisticated view of specification, but my simple understanding of it is just think of a regression. Right? I have an overspecified model. I have too many variables. There's noise. They're cross-correlated, whatever. I've overspecified my model versus underspecified my model. I only have two terms. It's not really doing it. So if we take this idea of fit for a particular sample, we take this idea of specification over and under. Specification and fitting leads to a number of different pitfalls in terms of the resolution and the form of our inferences. Right? So what we do in this paper is we use these criteria, correspondence, coherence, and pragmatic criteria, to navigate pitfalls of underfitting and overfitting. I'm not going to go into it too much. We have a set of coherence criteria that correspondence criteria, I feel like we all know. It's a lot of our statistical tests and that sort of thing. The coherence criteria have to do, and some of the things we're playing around with is one can imagine two different theoretical bases and then an empirical finding, and we're translating one, the theoretical understandings to our empirical finding. The other thing is we're using theoretical ideas to reconcile multiple empiricals. You can think of it as multiple theoretical reconciled with our empirical, multiple empirical reconciled with our theoretical. The pragmatic is an issue of abstraction. I'm not going to spend too much time with this. I'm going to finish with this story. And this is a paper we published last year. And it's exactly this. We did exploratory work. We went to open source. And we had this idea that open source people, so there's existing theory. And the existing theory is the theory of superposition, which is why do people do open source? Because they're very interested in whatever they're interested in. And they kind of volunteer and self-organize. And the software is modular. And the software is kind of modular. And they wait till the modules are there till they do it. This is the superposition. You're layering code on top of code. You postpone any of your priorities till the existing modules are there. That's the theory of superposition. So there's a fundamental theory of attention. People will only pay attention to certain things. And it's uniform across the whole process. So with Aaron Lindbergh, with his dissertation, I was at Case. Let's go back forever. I was at Case. He was there. We identified that, wait a second, their activities are different. They don't seem to do this superposition thing because we were trying to model superposition, this theory that Hausen had. We're like trying to model it, and we're like, it doesn't look like it's happening all the time. And it's theory of attention. So we decided, taking this coherence view, that how do people pay attention? Does it work this way? We ended up with realizing that there are these releases. And what they do before the release and what they do after the release is different. So we looked at 4 open source frameworks. We looked at before the release, we looked at after the release, and we tried to characterize how attention is different. We submitted it on ISO. 4 years later, there were a couple of things they did. The first is they're like, you gave us only 4 projects. How do you know that won't work for, and those 4 projects are all like mid-sized frameworks. How do you know that's going to work for all projects? So we're like, oh crap. And they're like, you could conceive just sample everything. So we had to make that judgment. How can we establish the validity of our inference that these four will represent the world, right? Then the other thing they said is, how can you know what you're seeing is attention? You're actually not seeing attention, you're seeing their action. And we'd be like, but their attention is what drives their action. And they're like, but you don't know that. They could be paying attention to a whole bunch of things, all you're seeing is their action. So like, oh crap. So here we are, where like our sample size is not big enough, and our coherence, our theory, we were abstracting what we were seeing out, they were not buying. So they got rid of that. They had a couple of other problems. So what did we do? Well, I'll just give you the answer to those two things. The one is we went and looked, and we found a theory of entrainment. And there's this theory of teams, and teams will behave differently before a deadline and after the deadline. And we're like, what if releases are that? And what if we use entrainment theory? So we just went and grabbed another way of thinking, and they loved it. They're like, okay, yeah, that's entrainment. That's what you're seeing. It's the same argument to us on a certain level as the attention argument, but now they bought it, so we had to give them the scaffolding they liked, the knowledge base they liked. And then with the sample size, since there were only 4, we could have gotten 8, we got 20 more. We decided they could just tell us to get everything on GitHub. So what we did is, since our 4 were similar, we sampled 3 more based on difference. So much different, 3 much different frameworks, about the same size. So we gave boundary conditions. We said we're not talking about big because those are going to have their own criteria. And there are a lot of organizations. We're not talking about small because those are weird. So we're going mid-sized. And we sampled based on difference 3 more. So we ended up with only 7. They bought that. What does this mean? This means that in order to establish the validity of our inferences in this paper, that people behave differently before the release and after the release, and how they behave differently and why, we had to essentially make a negotiated judgment call between us and the review team to establish the validity. And we don't have to do everything we say, but we have to kind of move in that direction. So they buy it, we buy it, and it's a negotiation. So what does that mean? If we're going to do exploratory work, it's essentially you got to do what you think is useful, and then you have to negotiate. And then, hopefully eventually they publish it. Thank you. Dude. Sorry. Wow, what an engaged group. I didn't think we'd go 2 hours. You said we had 2 hours, and we're going to go an hour and 15 minutes. Yeah, I need something to drink. We have a huge bottle of water.
We have to give them water. Did you intend it to be 2 hours?
No, he told me it's 2 hours, but I told him it'll be an hour. Yeah,
The other seminars are either 1 or 1.5.
Wow.
Yeah, you're the longest. Like you're literally the longest. I think we
That's
can
it.
see.
It's your fault. Right? Team, it's Kevin's fault. It's not mine.
Obviously.
Slide 1, question 1.
Yeah.
No, I went to NTU and they don't even let me pass my first slide like an hour in.
An hour in, you're still. Someone's here. All right, Sarah, we actually had a viewer.
Yes, you did. I'm sorry it was late. I was in the school council meeting, but it was quite interesting that we actually talk about what's relevant to research. It was very good. Thank you.
All right, Sarah, very nice to see you. All right, now.
Can you send me the link? Send me the link.
Yeah.
I definitely need that.
All right.
Thank you.
What a group. I love Miami. Yeah. I used to think Nina was the only likable person here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,